Okay. Good afternoon and welcome everybody out there in the big, beautiful world. I have the great opportunity on Empowerment with Elysia here today to be interviewing my new friend, Rosie Withey, currently located near Bath in England. I love to get to talk to my fun friends in the UK so I can listen to their glorious accents all day long. Rosie, thank you so much for being on the show today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
You are so welcome. Rosie has a really incredible story, and she has so many things that she does that I'm going to hand off most of it to her. But I'd love to get to touch on the fact that she actually got to train the British Pentathlon show jumper team to Olympic success, which is so phenomenal, getting to travel to Hungary and Egypt and Czechoslovakia. And I think that's just super cool. She also does Reiki and radionics, which I'm really curious to hear about because I have no idea what that is. And the life coaching, she's been doing equine assisted learning for the last 12 years. She just does so much, folks. And we're going to talk about authenticity, congruency, and how horses teach us how to really check in more with our energy, our emotional intelligence, and our intuition to help us be more in present time. So some of my favorite topics ever. So Rosie, why don't we start kind of in the beginning? What got you into horses? Your mom had horses, right?
Oh, I think it goes back further than that, Elysia. It goes back to my grandfather. So he was the real horsey person, but they used the horses on the farm. So my grandfather was a farmer. And it was only a few years ago that I went to a museum with my daughter and my mum, and we walked around, and my mum said, I used to use that, I used to use that, I used to use that. And now you look at the tractors that my nephew drives, and you can't believe, how much things have changed in that time. So actually horses were an integral part of life growing up for Mum. And she has loads of stories to tell about her young life and hunting days. And she was really, really a keen horse rider. So I've got photos of me sitting on a horse, right? I suppose I was a few months old. So yeah, so I had my first little pony, I think, when I was like 4. Wow. And we did lots of all sorts of things, but we did lots of showing and gymkhana events and jumping, a bit of everything, all the way through. Yeah, so right from a very, very young age.
That's beautiful. What a glorious life. Mm. And your mom, wasn't she an amateur horse racer? Like a jockey?
Yes, she when she had us as children, she started she gave up, well, she didn't give up riding, but she was a qualified instructor. So she spent time teaching, and also alongside my cousin, they sort of bought horses, brought them on and sold them. And quite often she bought retired racehorses and spent time with them doing, dressage or show jumping, and then occasionally recompeting them. But her love had always been racing. What she had always wanted to do herself, which is part of my story. But she didn't ever get to race herself. But what she did eventually do was manage to get an amateur permit to train racehorses. So cool. In my early 20s, she had a racehorse, and she won 6 races with that one horse. And I was the groom. And that was incredible, really incredible, Elysia, because I would regularly be in the stables with other stable lads who'd been working for a yard with, maybe 10 or 15 horses, and they'd never had a winner.
Wow.
So it was pretty amazing. And then after that, she bred some horses. So they were homebreds from the show jumping pony I had as a teenager. And when I was a teenager, she sold one of my ponies and put the other one in foal when I was doing my exams. Mm-hmm. So I sort of had a break. And it was those, the relatives or the progeny of those horses that eventually I went on to race ride myself.
That's really cool. Mm. What was it like? I mean, growing up, my mom, I love my mom. She grew up in the city and she was terrified of my ponies. So it's a very different dynamic to think of what it's like growing up in a family where horses were just like part of your life. So especially on a competitive level. So what was that like growing up with your mom and feeling like, did you come up together in that? Was there something of like competition or feeling like you needed to hit
Well,
a certain standard or?
yeah, that's a really good question. So I didn't feel competition. I felt very supported.
Awesome.
But it wasn't until much later, in fact, when I actually started equine facilitated learning, that on reflection, I was partly living my mum's dream for her, which I had never realized. So although I did love the horses, I don't think I really loved the competition. So if you ask me what I loved the most about competing, it was the training that went on behind the scenes. It was getting the horses ready. And I remember going on a show jumping clinic once with a show jump trainer called Pat Burgess, who many people will know because she trained Ginny Lang before the Olympics. And she said, what is your cutout height? She went around the group and asked, what is your cutout height? And I just didn't know how to answer. And she could see that I was deliberating because I wanted.
Hold on a second. For any of our audience members that don't understand what cutout height is, can you explain that to us before we go on?
Yeah, what she wanted me to say is what height I would be happy to jump before I didn't want to go any higher.
Fair.
And I knew that she could see that I was trying to push myself to say higher than I was truly comfortable with. And so I can't remember what figure I gave her, but she said, why don't you compete to that slightly lower level, produce the horses and let your staff take them to the high levels? And I think that was the first time anybody had really accepted that I was good at what I did, and it was okay to have a cutout level that was lower than I was expecting of myself. And I think that was the thing that I didn't know I was doing it in my childhood, but I think what I was doing is trying to push myself to do well for my mum, to do well for my mum, and also for my dad, who wasn't a horsey at all. But I remember the only day he ever took me show jumping, I was in the lead, and the last person to go beat me by 1/10 of a second.
Oh,
and then feeling that it wasn't quite good enough, even though you were second. And Dad would joke, I'd come home from the show and if I had a second rosette, he would say, where's the first? And so I think there was that subliminal feeling, which of course now I completely understand doing the work that I do now, how over a period of time, even if it's said as a joke, a child might take that as a meaning, it's not good enough. Yeah, so actually I felt really, really supported. I had some great times with my mum, but towards the end of my teens, I actually naturally gravitated to buying horses and selling them rather than competing. And in fact, you won't be surprised to hear this, but I had 3 horses on the trot that just prior to me competing them, something went wrong. It was so weird. It was almost like I wasn't meant to be competing them. I had done the bit that I was, that I love doing, and that was actually nurturing them, bringing them on, taking them to the shows, introducing them to that, and then selling them on to somebody that actually wanted to do competing.
It sounds like your favorite part is connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I didn't know. It's weird.
I feel like also when we were younger too, it wasn't necessarily seen as something that was enough. That creating connection, nurturing healthy foundational training and groundwork and whatnot is that's an acceptable thing to just honor, to build that healthy foundation, and then find the right person that can honor the next level of what that connection and training can look like.
Well, I really noticed that when I had my riding centre, because after working for my dad, I ran the family business, which was a feed mill, and we made animal feed. I then retrained as a riding coach, and I built a riding centre. And what I really realized there was exactly that. My real passion was in taking time to help each of my clients to build that solid foundation. And then when they were ready to go, if they wanted to go show jumping or dressage or eventing, you know, they could go off and find, you know, loads of other people in the area who they could specifically train in those areas with. Yeah.
I'm curious what it was like for you going into an Olympic level sport with the horses, with the show jumping and doing the training, taking them to Olympic success, yet keeping that connection when I feel like there would oftentimes be a high levels of ego and expectation when training people for the Olympics.
That's really interesting. It was tough. I found it really tough. Because there was a high level of expectation. But what was interesting is the expectation was often of the athletes on themselves. So I was really, really fortunate because three of the, I think I had about half a dozen, 6 or 8 women and 6 or 8 men that were coming regularly. But the 3 that were the top at the time had all been through the pony club to triathlon. So they had already competed on horses. So they were already good riders. Whereas some of the others, I had one who was a biathlete. So she had ran and swam, but she had never fired a pistol, and she had never fenced, and she had never ridden. And so the focus for them was purely on balance. So finding a balance that they could stay in canter, in balance on the horse, and a rhythm between the fences. And the key thing for them, Elysia, is they had 20 minutes in which to get to know this strange horse that they didn't know.
Wow.
And then jump a course of 4-foot fences.
It's not a lot of time. And
of course, as you probably already know, it's this year that it has actually finally been banned. And I can completely understand why, because it's a huge ask to ask in such a highly pressurized. I had to ride a strange horse within 20 minutes and jump a course of 4-foot fences for my intermediate, because I'm a British Horse Society intermediate instructor. But it was me and my pressure for me on a personal journey. I wasn't out there representing my country to win a gold medal. And there is an element of luck within it, because you are drawn lots which horse you're going to take. And, you know, with the best will in the world, people aren't going to send their best quality horses, because they're getting anybody, you know, lots of different riders from different countries riding them. What I'm sad about is that I think, you know, perhaps they could have made the show jumping more like swimming or some of the other sports, gymnastics, where they had the lower fences, not so high, and then had a mark for style, rather than making it about the, you know, the height that they had to do. Yeah, you know, clearly that might have made it more complicated in other ways. But I actually, the getting to know the horse bit was very familiar with me, because I trained lots of students to become instructors. That was something that I was used to teaching my students to do. But the high level at which they were competing and the pressure under which they were competing was the extra challenge. And also it was all done in one day. So they would be up at 5:30 in the morning and go straight to the firing range and pistol shoot. Then they would go there from the fencing hall and they'd be fencing for 3 hours. Then they go there from there to the swimming pool. Then they would go there from the show jumping arena and ride this horse. And then they would go running all within that same day. and phenomenal. I mean, to me, it was actually phenomenal what those athletes did. I found it really stressful, and I realized that what I found really stressful is I felt responsible for them. And that's something that I had to learn not to, because I was responsible for training them to get to that point. But obviously when they went in the arena, that's their responsibility. So if they won the gold medal, that was also their gain. Mm-hmm. And if they had 2 fences down, that was also their, you know, I had done my best up to that point, but I think that was the bit that I found really difficult. But it was a wonderful experience to be part of that community, to learn so much about the dedication of the coaches, of the athletes themselves. Yeah, so I really enjoyed the time that I was working with them.
Oh, that's beautiful. I can well imagine. How did you foster connection in that 20-minute period for those riders? Like, what did you teach them to do to try and connect with the horses in that period that helped facilitate that best for the horse and for the rider?
It's really interesting that, because I wish I knew now what I wish I knew then what I know now. Mm-hmm. I knew then what I know now, but I now know a better way of actually facilitating the rider to connect themselves. Yeah. So I think I probably did it more intuitively then without doing it verbally. So I would have been working with them on really paying attention to the horse and what they were feeling from the horse underneath them to start with. And just maintaining the connection, and through their own how they were feeling in their own body, and then connecting with how the horses was feeling. But in those days, now I would be honestly thinking about what my body sensation was and what I was picking up from the horse. But then I would have been focusing on the actual physical movement of the horse's walk, and what that felt like in the rider's body, and what that felt like in the trot. And largely they were working in the canter because they were jumping. So we would work from the walk into the canter, not spend too much time in trot. And the first thing they would do is just establish that rhythm in the canter. And then they needed to be able to move from one canter to another canter. So really getting into canter, and then just noticing how easily, or what they needed, like you would get in a car and know how you could move forwards and backwards. So that was the thing that I would use to get them to get the connection in the canter. And once they felt they had that in both directions, and then find out if the horse felt more easy to move in the right direction than the left direction. And then I would start with them over a small cross pole, and so they could find their rhythm and then just build up from that.
Did they ever do any sort of like groundwork connection? I mean, it's only 20 minutes, so I can't imagine that there would be much time to do any sort of groundwork connection.
No, you didn't have that time at all.
Should build it in. It's very important.
Yeah,
I mean, it's definitely part of the process.
Of course, yeah. Yeah.
So from working with them, training for the Olympics, what was the next stage? Is like the key things that you learned from there, and then shifting into the next stage of your horsemanship and development with Reiki and life coaching, etc.
I think what I learned from the pentathletes is who I really wanted to work with, because they wanted to win a gold medal. They knew what they wanted to do. And so what I took away from that is making sure that when my clients came along, I wanted to work with people who absolutely knew what they wanted to achieve. Now, it didn't matter to me if it was somebody who had never ridden before, but they wanted to achieve this by a certain time, or whether they did want to compete. For me, I wanted to work with somebody who was taking that amount of self-responsibility to develop. And sometimes, well, I can remember one client I went to, and he bought a young horse and he wanted to event, and we started on the groundwork and built up, and the horse was very unbalanced, it was very green, it hadn't enough strength, to do the eventing. And so I said to him, okay, you have a choice. In my view, if you want to go eventing, you need to sell this horse and you need to buy a different horse, or keep this horse and start with the dressage. Now, I was completely amazed. I went back the following week and he said, okay, I've decided I want to keep this horse. I'm going to start and I'll build up over time. And that's what he did. So he started with the dressage, and about 2.5 years later, I think he did his first event on that horse. So I really loved that, because that was taking the time to build the connection, to build the foundation of the groundwork, to make sure the horse was muscled up correctly, had time to learn. He was a particularly sort of gangly horse that was needing to have time to grow into himself.
Yeah.
But so that was what I learned. Is so for me, the rider who wanted to come and have a lovely ride and then go away and then come back next week and just have another lovely ride, that they weren't the ones that inspired me. So I had 6 staff at the time, so I had all sorts of different staffs, and some love working with the children and some love working with the people that just wanted to have fun. And I knew that what I liked doing is working with the people that really wanted to progress.
That makes sense to me.
And with regards to the Reiki, that at the same time as alongside working with the pentathletes, I mentioned earlier on that my mum had started breeding. Well, she had bred some horses with a view to them becoming racehorses, but sadly they weren't. And what was really hard for me is if these horses had been brought to me by an outsider, I would have been as clear as I was with that client I've just told you, and perhaps said, this horse isn't going to make this grade, you need to think about something else. What I realized I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, is, oh, it's my mum, I'll make it work, I'll keep going, I'll make it happen. And each of those 3 horses had physical problems and behavioral challenges. And I was working with both at the same time, but they were the horses that taught me that the physical problems were creating the behavioral challenges. And so that's when I had a member of staff on the yard whose mum did Reiki, and she said, would you like me to come and do a session? I had no idea what it was. And so she came and did a session, and I could see the benefit of the horse becoming really calm. And at that point, I hadn't quite worked out that the stress was coming from the discomfort of the pain and the physical challenge rather than the behavioral challenge. And the radionics, which you said you didn't know what that is. So radionics is a form of distant healing. And you use you take a piece of hair for a human or a piece of mane for the horse, and you use that as a connection, and it's all done through sort of dowsing and also through different instruments. But the underlying principle is that every single part of our body has a healthy vibrational wavelength. And by dowsing each part of the body, you could find out where the imbalances were.
What's dowsing?
Oh, with a pendulum. Have you ever had a pendulum? So you start with a pendulum and you swing the pendulum. It goes off to either the right or the left as a yes or no, or does a circle. Everybody has their own language with the pendulum. And that's how you then identified where the imbalances were. And then you had different instruments. There's lots of different schools of radionics, so they all work slightly differently.
Fascinating.
But I think what the 3-year training in radionics did for me, I didn't continue with it, so I don't continue to practice it now. because I realized what it was doing is help me understand that connection between mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual, which, as you know, I'm really passionate about now.
Yeah.
Because you were looking at all of those levels when you were healing and how they all integrate. So those horses clearly were part of my life, not to become racehorses, but to help me really start on the journey of understanding how physical challenges can create behavioral challenges, and how we deal with them on an emotional level and how we interact with them can make a difference as well.
Yeah, that's for sure. So at what point did you shift into the equine assisted learning and life coaching from there?
Well, after when the pentathlete came along, I'd sort of got to the point where I was ready for something different. I had decided to sell the riding centre. So I sold my riding centre, and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do at the time. So I carried on freelance teaching, and I was sort of waiting for what was going to be next. I didn't really know what was going to be next. And I'd done my training in hypnotherapy and life coaching. And then we found a new premises. So then the focus was on moving to this new premises. And then when we moved here, we had a couple of stables, and I'd had a couple of years without horses. And I thought, oh, I'll get a horse now. And that's when I bought Jack, who's the horse on the photo with me. And he was a little underweight when I bought him. And I thought, oh, well, 6 months of Rosie's TLC and he'll be great. And he was quite nervy when I first had him. He was a bit nervous when I loaded him and traveled him on his own. He wasn't very happy. I had my daughter's pony here with him, but he wasn't very happy when they were separated. And I don't think I really acknowledged it for how much of a challenge it was for him. And over a period of time, he got a little bit spooky. And so I did lots of groundwork with him. That's at a time when I met Peggy Cummings. I don't know if you've heard of Peggy, but Peggy Cummings and Connected Riding. And I went on several of Peggy's workshops in the UK and started doing a lot of groundwork with him. And knowing that his balance wasn't great, I was improving his balance. But I was still having this challenge with him when I was riding him, and I didn't feel safe all the time, and I couldn't put my finger on it because it wasn't quite the lack of safety I'd had on some other spooky horses. And then I was just trying to man up and push myself, just get on with it. Anyway, after a few months, he spooked at some cattle in the field. I didn't realize they were the other side of the hedge, and shot sideways, and we both went down on the road. And I'd had a reading with an animal communicator who had told me about Linda Kohanov and her book, The Tao of Equus. And I hadn't read it, but whilst I was convalescing, because I'd broken my collarbone, I Googled and found Linda's book and read Linda's book, and it was mind-blowing because it brought together, it mentioned Peggy Cummings in the middle, and I'd just been working with Peggy. It mentioned Linda Tellington-Jones, and I'd done quite a lot of work with Sarah Fisher, who lives quite close to here, and the Tellington Touch. And so I decided to go and have a private session, and I went to Shropshire and had my first private session with a lady called Angela Dunning, who has recently written a book called The Horse Leads the Way. Mm-hmm. And Angela is very passionate about as Linda is, about the way the horse is treated in the equine facilitated learning field. What I really loved about Linda's approach is that the horse is a sentient being, and it is the teacher. It's not a tool. It's actually the facilitator, and we're helping the horse to facilitate the session. But when I went for that session, it was well, I can't even describe it. It was so life-changing. I had a 2-hour session one day, and I then stayed overnight and then had a 2-hour session the next day. That I signed up for her workshop, the introductory workshop, the following month. And on that workshop, I met another lady, Caroline, who was also interested in Linda's training. And we both went, shall we go? 3 months later, we were on the plane to Arizona to start the training. So I think it was timing. I'd sold the riding center, so I had the money in the bank. I was looking for what next. Linda's book came along, and it was the next piece of my puzzle, because what I truly believe from reading Linda's book is that she had found a way to teach what I knew I could do intuitively, but I didn't know how to teach somebody else how to do it intuitively. So for example, if I was lunging a horse, so I'm in the middle and I've got a long rope and the horse is moving around me, and it's something that students have to learn to do to pass their instructor's exam. So I might be teaching one of my students to ask the horse to walk and then to trot and to move between the two. And sometimes I would hand the rope and the stick to the student, and the horse would stop and then come and turn in and stand next to them. And I was like, no, not like that. I'll show you again. You do it like focusing on what I was doing with the rope and the stick, not focusing on my internal energy. And of course, that's the key.
Right.
And so Linda's work is all about that internal energy, what your body sensations are, what your emotions feeling, and how you're projecting that energy and how you're connecting through your breath with the horse. And so specifically now I'm able to translate that in a way that, some of those things I did intuitively, which I think I had learned intuitively from my mum. So she hadn't actually told me what to do. I suppose I picked that up from her.
It makes a lot of sense, as we do modeling so much in life.
Yeah, that's right. And so that was back in 2000. So I qualified in 2010. Yeah, so that was my journey into, and that's how I started doing equine facilitated learning.
And now you do, like, you really focus a lot on the emotional intelligence, and like, let's bring that into the authenticity and congruence, which is so much of the basis of your work. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think so. To do that, I think I'll go back to my experience with the horses then in my very first session with Angela, because that was when I realized how important the congruence was. So what Angela asked me to do was, first of all, she'd taken me through a body scan in the house before we'd gone out to see the horses. So just to connect with my body, notice what I was feeling, and to get some information from that body. And I have no idea, I can't remember what that was all about. But then we went out into the yard, and there were 4 horses in 4 different stables. And she just asked me to stand a little way away from the horses and just to go around them one at a time and notice what I was feeling, and to tell her what came up for me. So in the first, with the first horse, I can't remember what came up with the first horse, but with the second horse, I got immediately an image of my mum. So there was something to do with my mum with the second horse. And whilst I'm connecting with the second horse, the third one, which was a bay gelding, is really agitated and running around its stable. And my mind is wondering what's wrong with the horse, in inverted commas. Anyway, when I got to pay attention to this horse and I closed my eyes, I was overwhelmed. I was shaking with fear, which I now know to be vulnerability. And when I closed my eyes, I was in the race that I had ridden on the horse that my mum had bred. And I realized I was transported back. And as I felt that feeling, the horse just calmed down in front of me. So as I honored how I was feeling, my body started calming down and the horse calmed down too. And I realized that I'd actually been terrified riding in those races. So there was a huge, a lot of emotion coming up at the time. And then I moved on to the second horse, and I felt the last horse, and I felt completely calm. But Angela later suggested that I dissociated by that time. I'd got quite overwhelmed. So when we sort of talked through the process afterwards, it took some time for me to completely understand, but I now realize that I had really pushed myself to ride in the races. It wasn't the thing that I really wanted to do. So in hindsight, I can see that I wanted to do it for my mum. I had evented the horse. I had great trust in her. I knew that I could jump the fences, but I don't think I had quite realized what that was going to be like in a field of, you know, other race riders. And I won one race, I was second in one race, and I was third in one race of those 3 races. So, you know, my family were ecstatic, and my mum and dad were so proud, and they all wanted to go to the pub and celebrate, and I just wanted to come home. And I think that is what I didn't really understand at the time. But having had that session with that horse that day, what I began to realize is that I had been living a lie. So what happened then is I came home, and of course I'd been working with my horse Jack. What I wasn't acknowledging is that I was nervous riding him out with his spooking. There was something about that was unnerving me, and I was pushing myself to ride him because, you know, I've just been running this centre for 13 years. I should be brave. And so the underlying story behind all of this was I should be as brave a rider as my mum. And I'm not, Elysia, and I never was. And I have no problem saying that now, but at the time it was huge, you know, it was huge. And I think I used to say I'm not as brave as my mum, and of course that's not true, because in many areas of life, you know, I'm very brave, but I'm not as brave a rider as my mum is actually really true. So what that enabled me to do is to be really honest about which horse I felt safe about getting on and which horse I didn't feel safe about getting on. And I cannot tell you, that made such a difference to my whole life. It was hard to start with because all the vulnerability and the shame came up of honoring that. Sure. But what I realized is when I honored it and allowed it to flow through me, it dissipated. And I had spent years with that low-grade vulnerability that had never gone anywhere, that I thought was a part of my whole life. Now the relationship with Jack improved, but eventually I had a second opinion, and he actually did have a physical problem in his neck. And so part of the spooking, if he saw something like a bird flew up, he tensed his neck, and that gave him like an electric shock. Or, you know, which was the bit that I probably found really unnerving, because it didn't match what, you know, what had just happened. And he did have treatment, but I figured that by the time, you know, this has taken a whole period of a few years, I decided that I would continue to do the groundwork with him and just enjoy him, rather than do what I might have done in the past and sell him to somebody else, or try and push myself. What What I really wanted to do was to be able to ride him, gallop across the field, and then write my book. This is how you do it.
These are the steps.
But the actual, what I realize now is, this is the story that I'm sharing with you now. The story that Jack actually is, the lesson I learned from Jack is it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be honest about how you feel. And in fact, if you are, then you can make sure you keep yourself safe and you can get the support you need to do whatever it is you want to do. And that is what I enjoy teaching other people. The key, and this comes up in the Equine facilitated learning, is that when you suppress your feelings and emotions, they don't go away. So they bubble up under the surface, and that's what the horses can sense. And they might escalate, or they might be completely suppressed. What I found really interesting was listening to your YouTube that you did with
Warwick?
With Warwick, and he said that he realized that he'd been dissociated. And to me, that's really interesting, because I think in that dissociated state, he was actually calm, even though he might not be calm, but his body was calm. And so that's, I think, what happens is when you suppress it, you either go to that state of Zen, but you're dissociated, or you completely escalate, in which case it creates much more drama for the horse. When you are honest about how you're feeling, your body calms down. Now, sometimes that means you can then go on and do what it is you wanted to do with the horse. Or in my case, it helped me to be calm enough to then choose whether I did or whether I didn't. And so after that, because I was still freelance coaching, when somebody said to me, Rosie, could you get on and ride my horse? Unless it was a horse that I felt safe to get on, because I'd been teaching it for a while, I'd seen it, I wouldn't get on something that I hadn't seen, and that was really tough to start with. But over time, I realized that I've gained respect from my clients as well. And also for some of them, they were too worried to get on. And I was giving them permission not to get on until we'd actually done more groundwork, we'd got the physio, we'd done all the things that we really needed to do to make sure that the horse was safe to get on. And then if they still weren't happy to, and I wouldn't, then we found somebody who would get on for the first time, and then take that process more smoothly.
That makes sense. It's really important to honor where you're at without shame or judgment or any real pressure, so we can just like let go of the ego and the expectation and just honor the people and the horses, the animals, for who they are and where they are in the spaces in front of us.
Yeah, and because ego, if you'd said, have I got an ego, I would have said no, because I would have thought an ego is bragging. But my ego was that I must push myself to do better. My ego was saying I must push myself to be as brave as my mum. I know I was doing things and I was riding horses that I wasn't feeling brave enough to ride, but I was making myself do it. And that's ego.
Yeah, and that negatively impacts the horse as well as the human.
Yeah.
But coming into the space of forgiveness, do you feel like it's easier for you to connect with both horses and humans, having come to that realization?
Oh, totally. Totally. And also, I know when I'm not connecting. I mean, one of the most difficult things when you're doing the workshops that I teach is when you're demonstrating something with the horse and you're teaching. So, and I say to my clients, okay, so this is an advanced skill, because first of all, I have to stay connected to my body. Then I need to stay connected with the horse. And then I need to stay connected to you, because I'm going to be describing something to you. And at some point, I'm going to drop the ball. I'm either going to stop listening to myself, or I'm going to stop listening to the horse, or I'm going to have to stop talking to you guys. And so in the early days, I made mistakes because I got so determined that I wanted to show these people how to get the horse to connect and follow with me. And the horse just stood just like, no, really, you're not, you're not present. So then I had to say to the clients, okay, I'm going to just be quiet. I'm not going to talk to you for a moment. I'm going to spend a few more minutes connecting with myself and connecting with the horse, and then I'll come back to you later. And sometimes it flows and I can do it all together, and sometimes I have to break it down. But what is, you know, the underlying thing for me is that I maintain the connection with the horse, you know, if I possibly can, because of course that's what the work is all, you know, that's what the work's all about.
Absolutely. And how would you define emotional intelligence?
Okay, so for me, emotional intelligence is an ability to initially understand, feel, and understand one's own emotions. And then also to be able to understand and to recognize the emotions in others. And the paradox or the challenge is that we are connected. So whilst I'm here talking to you, you know, I will have my own feelings going on, you will have your own feelings going on, and at times I might be picking up on things that I might think you're feeling, but I won't know whether that they started with you or they started with me, because if I was feeling nervous, you might pick up on my nerves and then I might pick up on that. And so for me, it's really important to start with myself. So I check in with myself before I enter a new situation. So I know what I was feeling like before I move into a new situation. I know what emotions I might have been, you know, and I was vulnerable coming onto this call. So I knew because I always am a bit nervous. So I knew that.
Great.
I know. And then I would sense into the other person. So you would do that by just noticing how you're feeling, but also obviously people's body language. You know, that's one of the first pieces of work that we do on one of the workshops is about nonverbal communication and helping people to recognize what they notice in another through just simply observing the horses.
Yeah.
Because we pick up so much information. So for me, an emotional intelligence is about understanding our own emotions and also then managing them. But I don't mean, when I say managing them, I don't mean suppressing.
Yes.
So in Linda's book, The Power of the Herd, she talks about emotional heroism. And I really love the analogy of emotional heroism. And for her, emotional heroism is when we have been able over time to really feel our feelings, honor our emotions, understand our emotions, and respond to them in the moment rather than being triggered by past experiences. Then we can begin to take on other situations that happen and let them flow through us and then ground them. So by regulating our emotions, we're only regulating them by allowing ourselves to process them. We're not regulating them by going, oh, I think I'll just allow this much, but I will push this down.
I love that.
It's I'll allow myself to feel it, and when I do, I know what that means, so I'll take responsibility to do this, and as I do that, I notice that it's calming down on its own.
Yeah.
And just before the call, I was talking to you, I did something really silly. On Friday, I managed to put petrol in my diesel car. And so I went about half a mile and my car broke down. And these really nice couple came out of the house and they said, you haven't just filled up, have you? And I was like, oh no. So my first thought was, God, what an idiot. I've done this before. Then it was like, I'm supposed to be teaching, a mindfulness teacher, and here I am, you know, doing it myself. But I really know I had 3 or 4 things going around in my mind. I wasn't clearly thinking, and I felt vulnerable because I had made this mistake. And what was really interesting is that didn't escalate. I immediately went into, okay, what I'm going to do now. I rang my partner, I rang the insurance company. organised to get my partner to tow me to the garage. You know, it took me about 10 minutes to sort of organise. In the past, my feelings prior to me doing this work, my escalation of vulnerability would have made me want to deny that I'd made a mistake in the first place. Yeah. You know, eat humble pie and be really odd with this couple who were just really lovely helping me. And probably be very fractious and angry with my partner who was also trying to help me. So it wasn't comfortable, because in the first 10 minutes I had to really sit with that feeling. But by sitting with it and realizing that, you know, however much we spend time doing this work, we still can make mistakes and we can still not be present, and we have to just deal with that.
Absolutely. It's the art of being human. You know, I think that no matter what level we attain in any profession, that we can still make mistakes, because all of us as human beings can get overwhelmed. So like there's a lot going on in the world these days. And I think it's probably pretty hard for most people to not at least occasionally have things slip through the cracks.
Yeah, and I know now, you know, I do quite a bit of speaking, and if I feel it's too much, I'll just say, like I did now, but I'm feeling calm when I said that. But sometimes I will feel nervous and I'll just say, I don't know why I'm feeling quite nervous today. And as I do, I can really feel immediately that energy shifting and changing, because I'm not going into a victim mode. Because for me, the victim is the opposite end from the pretending everything's fine.
Right.
So it's the both sides of the same coin. So it is still the ego, what Linda calls the false self. So the false self, that's the, you know, the bravado bit, and the false self is the victim. It's the same coin. And I think that a lot of people think if they acknowledge their vulnerability, it means that they're lacking confidence or they're undermining themselves, and that's not true.
Yeah.
And I know that because I speak to so many successful business people and horse people who I really realize feel vulnerability, honor their vulnerability, and move through it very quickly. And that's what makes them really good at what they do. Yeah. You know, good at what they do.
Absolutely. I appreciate you sharing all of that. So where can people find you in the world today?
So I have a Facebook group. So I have Rosie Withey Emotional Wellbeing Coaching Facebook group, and I have a website which is rosiewithey.co.uk, and I am also on Instagram as Rosie Withey Coach.
Fantastic. And I've been on her platforms. Everybody out there, she's fantastic. I highly recommend Rosie, of course, as she's here. And Rosie, as always, our closing question: who inspires you in the world today?
Oh, I like that question. Well, I think I've been saying for a long time that Linda Kowanov and Carol Rausch, who trained with Linda and was my mentor for 2 years, and Peggy Cummings are 3 ladies who inspire me the most. And the reason they inspire me is because they walk their talk. And so we were talking about authenticity and congruency. And I have, you know, worked with them and trained with them over a period of years. And I have seen times when things didn't go well. And they showed me that it's not about pretending everything's fine, about honoring that things aren't going well and then deciding what to do to move through that. And so I feel really safe when I'm being trained by people who are congruent and authentic, and they create a safe space for that. And so that's what inspires me, because that's what I aim to do in my work too.
Oh, I love that so much. It's a really beautiful thing to engage with the world in an authentic, vulnerable way. So Rosie, thank you so much for being on the show today. I greatly appreciate your candor, your wisdom, and your time that you shared with us this afternoon.
Oh, thank you, Elysia. Really enjoyed talking to you.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
So,
bye for now.
anybody out there that's been watching the show, if you're interested in being on my show, please do connect with me at www.globalequineaffiliates.com. You can message me on Facebook at Elysia Jane Buss or on Instagram at Elysia Buss. And until next time, we'll see you later. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.